The headlines this morning are fascinating. They are truly something to behold. If you were to open the New York Times or turn on CNN, which, frankly, I do not recommend if you value your cognitive bandwidth, you would think that the sky is falling. You would think that Donald Trump has finally lost his mind. They are using words like unhinged. They are using words like imperialism. They are screaming about international law and sovereignty with this hysterical pitch that reminds me of a malfunctioning alarm system that no one knows how to turn off. It is honestly bizarre. It is bizarre to watch the entire legacy media apparatus suffer a collective kernel panic because one man decided to look at a map and do basic arithmetic. They are obsessed with the aesthetics. They are obsessed with the politeness of the decline. They sit at their cocktail parties in Davos and they talk about norms and diplomatic protocols. They treat politics like it is a tea party where the most important thing is that you hold your pinky finger out correctly. But while they are worrying about manners, the actual architecture of Western civilization is rotting. The foundation is cracking, and when someone finally walks in with a sledgehammer to fix the foundation, they scream that he is making too much noise. Let's strip away the noise. Let's look for the signal. Let's look at the physics of the situation, because that is what actually matters. The laws of physics do not care about your feelings, and they certainly do not care about the editorial board of the Washington Post. What Trump is doing right now, what he is doing with this so-called ultimatum regarding Greenland, it is not madness. It is not bullying. It is high-stakes mergers and acquisitions. It is M&A. That is the only framework that makes sense here. Think about it from a systems engineering perspective. The United States is, for all intents and purposes, the operating system of the Western world. We provide the security kernel. We provide the encryption. We keep the bugs out. We keep the viruses, China, Russia, from crashing the system. Now, you have a user, let's call them Denmark, who is holding the admin password to a critical piece of hardware, Greenland. This is a piece of hardware that sits directly in the flight path of every intercontinental ballistic missile that would be aimed at New York or Washington. It sits on top of the largest deposits of rare earth minerals outside of China. It is arguably the most strategic real estate on the planet right now. And who is managing this asset? Denmark. I like Denmark. Great pastries, lovely architecture. But let's be real. Let's be brutally honest here. Denmark has a military budget that is basically a rounding error on a Tesla quarterly earnings report. They have a population smaller than the suburbs of Houston. The very idea, that they can secure a landmass the size of Western Europe against the focused, predatory ambition of the Chinese Communist Party it's laughable. It is a simulation error. It is physically impossible. So you have a critical vulnerability in the system, a zero-day exploit waiting to happen. And the previous administration, the Biden team, they were happy to just ignore it. They were happy to let the code rot because they didn't want to have an awkward conversation with Copenhagen. Trump looks at this, and he sees a distressed asset. He sees a liability, and he says, we are going to acquire this asset before a competitor does. It is rational, it is logical, it is inevitable. And this threat of tariffs, the 10%, the 25%, the media calls it a trade war. They call it extortion. That is because they don't understand leverage. I call it a subscription fee. That is what it is. It is a security subscription fee. For 70 years, Europe has been using the premium version of American security for free. They have been freeloading on our bandwidth. They want us to protect the shipping lanes. They want us to keep the Russians out, but they want to lecture us on how we do it. Well, the free trial is over. Trump is simply sending the invoice. He is saying, okay, you want to keep the title deed to Greenland? You want to pretend you are a superpower? Fine. Then you pay the premium. You pay the tax. You don't get to outsource your survival to us and then complain about the rent. They are crying about sovereignty. It is really rich, coming from nations that cannot even defend their own borders. Sovereignty is not a piece of paper signed in Geneva. Sovereignty is the capacity to defend your existence. If you cannot defend it, you do not own it. You are just leasing it from the guy with the biggest stick. So, buckle up. The media is going to scream. the diplomats are going to faint. But for the first time in a long time, we have an operator in the White House who is actually looking at the source code of the problem instead of just polishing the user interface. Trump isn't breaking the system. He is debugging it. And sometimes, debugging is a loud process. If we are going to debug this system, we have to look at the error logs. We have to look at the source code of the geopolitical architecture we are currently running. Because right now, the Western Alliance is running on legacy code. It is running on a stack that was written in 1951, and it has not been patched for the reality of 2026. Debugging is a loud process, yes, but ignoring the bug is fatal. And the bug here is not Donald Trump's tone. The bug is the physical impossibility of the status quo. Let's look at the physics. Just the raw, Newtonian physics of the situation. Greenland is the world's largest island. It has a coastline of roughly 44,000 kilometers. That is massive. It is an order of magnitude larger than the area any standard European power can project force over. Now, look at Denmark. Denmark is a great country, very organized, very hygge. But their active military is somewhere around 20,000 personnel. To put that into perspective, and I want you to really visualize this, the New York City Police Department has more officers than Denmark has soldiers. So you have a police force smaller than the NYPD trying to secure a landmass that is 3 times the size of Texas, which sits directly in the Arctic choke point between the United States and our greatest adversaries. In engineering terms, this is what we call a critical failure in resource allocation. It is a buffer overflow, waiting to happen. You cannot cover that much surface area with that little bandwidth. It is physically impossible. For decades, we pretended this wasn't a problem, because the United States Navy was effectively subsidizing the difference. We provided the security umbrella, we paid the costs. And Denmark got to keep the title deed and feel good about themselves at UN summits. It was a moral hazard. We incentivized them to be weak because we promised to be strong for them. But nature abhors a vacuum. That is a fundamental law of physics, and it is a fundamental law of power. When you leave a vacuum in a strategic corridor, entropy sets in. And the entropy here has a name. It is called the Polar Silk Road. See, the media talks about this like it is some archaic, colonial land grab. They are obsessed with the optics, but they are missing the vector. The vector is China. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state. Think about the absurdity of that string of words. China is about as near to the Arctic as I am to being a professional ballerina. But they say it, and they mean it. Why? Because they are operating on a longer time horizon than our politicians. They are playing Go while Washington has been playing checkers. They know what is under the ice. And this brings us to the root cause. This is the kernel panic of the entire Western economy. Rare earth elements. Everything we build, everything that defines the modern world, runs on these materials. Your iPhone, the magnets in a Tesla Model 3, the guidance systems in a Tomahawk missile, the F-35 fighter jet, they all require neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and, right now, and this is the terrifying part that nobody on CNN wants to talk about, China controls the admin access to this supply chain. They process 90% of the world's rare earths. 90%. If President Xi decides tomorrow to turn off the tap, if he decides to execute a pseudo-shutdown on rare earth exports, the American military-industrial complex grinds to a halt. Our economy stops. We cannot build electric vehicles. We cannot build wind turbines. We cannot build the weapons we need to defend ourselves. We have allowed ourselves to become dependent on our primary rival for the very fuel of our technological existence. It is insanity. It is suicide by incompetence. Greenland sits on one of the largest undeveloped deposits of these minerals in the world, Kvanefjeld, Tonbreeze. It is all right there, but it is locked up. It is locked up because the European regulatory framework, infected by the woke mind virus, prioritizes environmental purity over civilizational survival. They would rather let the minerals sit in the ground and buy them from China, who mines them with zero environmental standards, by the way, than dig them up themselves. It is a recursive loop of hypocrisy. They signal virtue while outsourcing the vice to China. And worst of all, Chinese state-owned companies are already there. They are buying stakes in these Greenlandic mining operations. They are embedding themselves in the code. They are gaining root access to our backyard. So, when you strip away the noise, when you ignore the outrage about buying countries, what you are left with is a simple system vulnerability. We have a strategic asset, Greenland, that is undefended and governed by an entity, Denmark, that lacks the CPU cycles to manage it. This asset is being targeted by a hostile actor, China, that wants to cut off our supply chain. Allowing this status quo to continue is not respecting sovereignty. It is negligence. It is a dereliction of duty on a civilizational scale. The system is blinking red. We are running on borrowed time. And the previous administration, the Biden team, they were just staring at the screen, hoping the error message would go away if they ignored it. They were paralyzed by process. You cannot fix a system failure of this magnitude with politeness. You cannot fix it with a summit in Brussels. You have to rewrite the permissions. You have to take control of the hardware. Trump sees this. He doesn't see a map of countries. He sees a map of leverage and liabilities. He understands that you cannot have your security firewall managed by a third-party vendor that is compromised. This is not about expansionism. It is about closing a security exploit before the virus takes over the entire network. And honestly, the fact that this even needs to be explained, the fact that this is considered controversial, shows you just how degraded our strategic thinking has become. We have lost the ability to think in first principles. We have forgotten that survival is the prerequisite for everything else. If we lose the Arctic, we lose the future. It is that simple. The math does not lie. The geography does not lie. And right now, the vector of our enemies is pointing directly at nuke, while our allies are busy arguing about carbon taxes. It is time to debug the system. And the only way to do that is to secure the root directory. See, to debug a system this complex. To secure that root directory, you cannot use a scalpel. You cannot use a polite memo from the State Department. The bureaucratic antibodies are too strong. They will swarm you. They will bury you in committee meetings and environmental impact studies until the heat death of the universe. To fix a bug this deep, you need a sledgehammer. You need a hard reset. And that is what Donald Trump is. He is the sledgehammer. He is the only operator in the Western Hemisphere willing to look at the source code, see the fatal error, and say, delete it, rewrite it. Now, the media looks at his ultimatum, the tariffs, the timeline, the blunt language, and they see chaos. They see a bull in a china shop. But that is because they are obsessed with the china. Trump is looking at the structural integrity of the shop itself. He realizes the roof is about to collapse, and he doesn't care if he breaks a few teacups to prop it up. This is an optimization problem. It is pure game theory. Let's look at the Golden Dome. This isn't just branding. It is geometry. It is ballistics. If you are building a missile defense shield to protect the American homeland from a hypersonic threat originating in Eurasia, you cannot do it from Florida. You cannot do it from Kansas. The physics don't work. The intercept geometry requires you to be in the Arctic. You have to catch the arrow at the top of its arc. Greenland is the apex. It is the high ground. For the last 50 years, we have been trying to run this defense architecture on a handshake deal with Denmark. We have been renting the most critical piece of real estate in our national defense portfolio. That is insane. You do not rent the land your house is built on from a landlord who might decide to sell it to your enemies because they offered a higher price. You buy the land. You secure the deed. Trump understands this instinctively. He is a builder. He knows that you cannot build a skyscraper on a foundation you do not own. So he proposes the deal. And let's actually analyze the deal, stripped of the hysteria. It is a classic distressed asset acquisition. Denmark is currently subsidizing Greenland to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It is a drain on their treasury. They have a population that is increasingly demanding independence. They have a security liability they cannot manage. It is a net negative on their balance sheet. Trump comes in and offers a solution. We take the liability off their hands. We provide a massive cash infusion, probably enough to fund the Danish social state for a decade. We assume the security burden. We guarantee the pensions. It is a win-win. Denmark gets liquidity and offloads a headache. The US gets strategic depth and resource security. The Greenlanders get investment and actual development instead of being a museum exhibit for climate activists. But the Europeans, they are stuck in this 20th century loop. They cry, imperialism. They cry, you can't buy people. This is where the tariffs come in. This is the genius of the Trump algorithm. The tariffs, the 10%, the 25%, people think this is punishment. It's not punishment. It is a forcing function. It is a reality check. For 70 years, Europe has outsourced its survival to the United States taxpayer. We pay for NATO. We pay for the nuclear umbrella. We keep the shipping lanes open so Mercedes can sell cars to China. We have been subsidizing their socialism with our defense budget. They have been free riding on our system architecture. Trump is simply saying, okay, the subscription model has changed. If you want to enjoy the benefits of Pax Americana, if you want the protection of the Golden Dome, you have to contribute to the infrastructure. You cannot block us from securing the shield that protects you. If Denmark refuses to sell and the rest of Europe backs them up, fine. But then you have to pay the premium. You have to pay the difficult partner tax. You have to pay the freeloader fee. It is simply aligning incentives. It is basic behavioral economics. If you make it expensive to be obstinate, people become reasonable very quickly. Think about how we run Tesla. When we realized that the supply chain for battery cells was too fragile, when we realized that relying on third-party suppliers for lithium and nickel was a bottleneck that could kill the company, we didn't just complain. We didn't hold a summit. We vertically integrated. We bought the mining rights. We built the refineries. We brought the entire critical path in-house. Why? Because you cannot innovate if you are begging for permission to exist. You cannot reach Mars if you are waiting for a supplier in another country to send you the fuel. The United States government has been operating like a bloated, legacy corporation that has outsourced its core IP to its competitors. We have allowed China to refine our minerals. We have allowed Europe to dictate our security posture. We have become a client in our own world. Trump is the CEO coming in and saying, we are bringing the supply chain in-house. We are vertically integrating the defense of the West. Is it aggressive? Yes. Is it uncomfortable? Absolutely. Surgery is uncomfortable. Chemotherapy is uncomfortable. But when the alternative is systemic failure, when the alternative is watching the Chinese Communist Party plant a flag on the world's largest rare earth deposit while we argue about pronouns, then uncomfortable is necessary. Trump is acting as a forcing function for reality. He is forcing Europe to choose. Do you want to be a museum of the past, or a partner in the future? Do you want to cling to a map from 1950, or do you want to survive 2050? He is doing the ugly, necessary work of securing the perimeter. And frankly, we should be thanking him for having the spine to do it, because I can tell you right now, the guys in Beijing, they aren't worried about being polite. They are worried about winning. And it is about time we started playing the same game. Because here is the terrifying truth about that root directory. Right now, we do not have the admin password. Beijing does. And if we do not regain administrative control over our own critical resources, if we do not secure the physical layer of our civilization, then everything else is just theater. It is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while the iceberg, the red iceberg, is staring us in the face. I want to zoom out for a second. I want to look at this not as a political squabble, but as a probability distribution of our future, because the stakes here, the stakes are existential. We are talking about the difference between a civilization that expands to the stars and a civilization that collapses into a dark age of scarcity and irrelevance. Let's talk about the tech stranglehold. People live in this hallucination that their iPhones, their Teslas, their F-35 fighter jets just appear out of thin air. They think technology is magic. It is not magic. It is geology. It is processed dirt. To build a high-performance permanent magnet, which you need for an electric motor, for a wind turbine, for the guidance system of a Tomahawk missile, you need neodymium, you need dysprosium, you need praseodymium. These are the vitamins of modern industry. Without them, the machine stops. And right now, the Chinese Communist Party controls 90% of the processing capacity for these elements. 90%. That is a single point of failure that no competent engineer would ever accept in a design. If President Xi decides tomorrow to execute a denial of service attack on the Western supply chain, if he decides to embargo these minerals. The American economy does not just slow down. It bricks. It turns into a paperweight. We would be unable to build the weapons to defend ourselves. We would be unable to build the electric grid to power our homes. We would be back in the 1970s, but without the disco music. Greenland sits on the solution. It sits on the Kvanefjeld deposit, one of the largest concentrations of these rare earths on the planet. But for decades, we have let it sit there, undeveloped. Because of what? Because of bureaucracy. Because of a lack of imagination. Because we were too polite to ask Denmark to actually use the land they claim to own. While we were sleeping, China was not. They have been trying to buy that island piece by piece for 10 years. They call themselves a near-Arctic state. They are building nuclear-powered icebreakers, while the U.S. Navy is struggling to get ships out of dry dock. And this leads to the second vector of the crisis, the woke distraction. This is the mind virus I talk about. It is not just about annoying people on Twitter. It is a civilizational autoimmune disease. While Russia is militarizing the Arctic, while China is securing the supply chains of the 21st century, what is Europe doing? What is the Western political class doing? They are arguing about the carbon footprint of a tank. They are passing regulations on AI memes. They are obsessed with deconstructing their own history and apologizing for their own existence. Europe is effectively committing civilizational suicide in slow motion. They have regulated themselves into a state of paralysis. They would rather import solar panels from China, made with coal power and slave labor, than mine the materials to build them in their own backyard, because mining looks ugly. It is a cognitive decoupling from reality. They are optimizing for feelings, while our adversaries are optimizing for physics, and in the long run, physics always wins. If you cannot secure your own energy and your own matter, you are not a sovereign civilization. You are a vassal state, waiting for the invoice to arrive. This is why Trump's move is so critical. He is trying to snap the West out of this coma. He is saying, look at the map. The vector of threat is coming from the north. The vector of dependency is coming from the east. We are being encircled, and we are too busy fighting culture wars to notice the siege engines at the gates. And I look at this. I look at this through the lens of the Fermi paradox. Where are the aliens? Why haven't we seen other civilizations? Maybe it is because of the Great Filter. Maybe civilizations reach a certain level of technology and then they lose the will to survive. They become complacent. They become obsessed with trivialities, and they get wiped out by a resource crunch or a more aggressive competitor. I do not want Earth to fail the Great Filter. We are trying to make humanity multiplanetary. We are trying to build a city on Mars. To do that, we need a robust, hyper-efficient industrial base on Earth. We need cheap energy. We need abundant resources. We need a secure launch pad. Greenland is the backup gas station for Western civilization. It is the strategic high ground. If we lose it, if we let it fall into the hands of a regime that hates liberty, then the window for becoming a space-faring civilization might close. Forever. We might be the last generation that has the chance to secure the future, and if that requires hurting the feelings of some diplomats in Copenhagen, or upsetting the editorial board of the New York Times, so be it. The universe does not grade on a curve. It grades on survival. And right now, we are failing the midterms. Trump is trying to grab the steering wheel before we drive off the cliff. People say it is dangerous. I say, the only dangerous thing is doing nothing. If we don't fix the code now, the system crashes, and there is no reboot button for a fallen civilization. And since there is no reboot button for a fallen civilization, we have to execute a hard reset on the current operating system while it is still running. That is dangerous, yes, but it is necessary. So, let's run the simulation forward. Let's look at the probability cloud of what happens next. What is the deterministic outcome of this so-called crisis? The media will tell you that this is the end of the Atlantic Alliance. They will tell you that Trump has isolated America. That is the noise. Ignore it. Look at the signal. Here's my prediction. And I am usually pretty good at pattern recognition. Denmark will protest. They have to. It is part of the political ritual. The Prime Minister will stand at a podium, look very serious, and talk about dignity and European solidarity. The EU bureaucrats in Brussels will issue very sternly worded memos. But, quietly, in the back channels, the accountants are going to look at the spreadsheets. They are going to look at that 10% tariff. Then they will look at the 25% tariff scheduled for June, and they will realize that their entire social safety net, all those 6-week vacations and government pensions, relies on trade with the United States. Physics always wins. Economics is just physics with money. The pressure will become too high. My guess? We don't buy Greenland outright next week. We end up with a 99-year lease. A Hong Kong-style agreement. Denmark gets to keep the flag and the sovereignty on paper, so they save face. But the United States gets the admin rights. We get the resource development. We get the security architecture. It is the only solution that balances the equation. It is inevitable. But zoom out. Look at what this moment actually represents. We are seeing a bifurcation of the species. A split. On one side, you have the parasites. The paperclip maximizers of bureaucracy. The legacy media. The people who think wealth is something you confiscate, not something you create. They are obsessed with process, with feelings, with distributing the misery equally. They want to manage the decline. They want a polite, slow, slide into irrelevance. On the other side, you have the builders, the operators, people like Donald Trump, people like the engineers at SpaceX. We believe that the future should be bigger than the past. We believe that you don't ask for permission to secure the future of the human race, you just do it. The parasites hate the builders because we expose their uselessness. When Trump proposes buying an island to save the country, they mock him because they cannot imagine thinking that big. Their minds are trapped in a tiny box of norms. But norms do not stop hypersonic missiles. Norms do not mine rare earth minerals. Action does. We are entering an era of high-stakes reality. The illusion is breaking, and that is a good thing. It is painful, but it is good. We are finally dealing with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. I want you to think about this. Which side are you on? Do you want to be part of the civilization that argues about pronouns while the lights go out? Or do you want to be part of the civilization that secures its resources, reindustrializes, and eventually expands consciousness to the stars? That is the choice. It is that binary. I am curious to see your data on this. Do you think Europe folds, or do they choose economic suicide to prove a point? Let me know in the comments. Don't just give me opinions, give me your logic. I actually read them. History is not written by the people who ask for permission. It is written by the people who have the courage to redraw the map. Donald Trump is redrawing the map here on Earth to ensure we survive. And me? I am busy drawing the map to Mars. Because we need a backup drive. Cheers.